George Steve Benson. Steve to most, but we call him Pop. He had a profound impact on too many people to count, but the three most impacted were Stephanie, Carrie, and myself. He always led by example, whether it was the love he showed Mom through his romantic gestures, the kindness he showed others, or the willingness to complete something to 110%, because if it was worth doing, it was worth overdoing. Or knowing when to kick back and relax. We all learned from watching him. He was so proud of us and said so often. His example led to 3 happy marriages, 7 grandkids, a scientist, an engineer, and a mother of 4. 5 if you include Bruce. Pop always carried 3 things with him. And I'm sure at some point in time, everyone in this room saw him use one of these. So, his pocket knife. Nothing shiny, nothing special. It was always there, and he could always count on it. He was a good Boy Scout, an Eagle Scout, in fact. He was always prepared, and he was always equipped to handle any situation, and he instilled that in us, and he looked for that quality in others. His notepad. Papa was a meticulous person. He had high standards of others, but especially of himself. He constantly took notes to ensure that he didn't miss the smallest of details. He took great pride in being trustworthy. If he gave you his word, it was documented, and you could be assured that it was going to be done and done to his standard. Then his cross. Nana and Pop both cultured a strong sense of faith in us growing up. This one you may not be aware of, but he always had this cross in his pocket. Anytime he needed reassurance, he'd reach into his pocket and it was there for him. Now this is a newer one. Unfortunately, he had lost the one he carried for many years. But his original one was so worn down, all the corners were rounded, you could no longer read Jesus Christ on the cross. It was well loved and well used. I'm sure largely during our teenage years. And then again when the grandkids came. A few lucky of us have received a cross from Pop as a gift. Here's mine. It's something I will always cherish. We love you, Pop. You built a strong foundation in us and everyone you helped educate. You'll be missed, but your legacy lives on in us. I believe, Dylan, you had some words you wanted to say as well.
Hello everyone, I'm Dylan Corey, Steve's grandson and Stephanie's son. I love Pop just like all of you guys did, and I have some great memories with him that I definitely will never forget. So I can remember when I was little and I would watch Scooby-Doo with my Nana and Pop, and that was probably one of the best memories. And also playing in the workshop while they were working was also pretty fun. And we would go and pick fresh fruit from the pear tree or Nana's garden, and we'd eat strawberries and pears. And I don't know what's so much different about them, but they're just amazing compared to the store-bought ones. And one of my favorite memories was when I was in the 6th grade. I had to do a school project where I had to build something, and I knew who I wanted to call. I called up Pop, and I asked him if we could work together, and he said sure, like he always would. And we decided on building a bench, and to this day, when I wake up, it's at the foot of my bed, and it has his signature on it. He was so happy when building it, and so happy when it was done, and it was just an amazing time. And I'm so glad that I have the memories with him that I do now, because it's just amazing. He was an amazing grandfather, and thank you for listening. Hi, I'm Steven. I was Pop's grandson, and I also had that same class with Dylan. So I also built a bench. I knew right away who to call when I got that project, and I called Pop if he could help me. He said yes, of course, and then we started to work on the bench. He taught me things during the process, and we completed it in a day. He taught me that if I'm going to do something, then I should do it right. And then we got the bench done in that day, and I also have that bench at the foot of my bed. Just recently, I went to get my Eagle Scout project approved, and Pop was there with me. It got suspended, but then I recently just got it approved, and he knew about it the day that he passed. Thank you for always being there with me, and thank you for helping me. I love you.
My Pop was an amazing man. You can see that by the people that are here today and those who have been with us throughout this sad journey that we've gone through. The impact that he left on our family, his friends, and the community is so visible, and it makes me so incredibly proud to be called his granddaughter and his first grandbaby. As you all know, Pop was an educator at heart, and he had a special appreciation for the subject math. My mom, Stephanie, got that math gene and shares the love that he had for the subject. I, on the other hand, did not. It's not my strong suit. strong, sweet in school, and it was always a relief when working on homework with Mom at home, and maybe there was some crying involved, that she would call up Pop, and his level-headedness brought ease to the problem, though it really wasn't that important in the short run. And his educator heart helped me work through the problem and taught me so much about math, but also about patience. And then another legacy that he leaves me and Nana is I'm sure if you've been to their house, you've seen it, the spotted cast iron tub at the end of their driveway. It's bright orange with white polka dots that do glow in the dark, and no, they're not Tennessee fans. I needed it for a play. He made it roll, he made it glow, and I sang a song in it on stage. And he brought that tub home, put it at the end of his driveway, so that he could see it, because he might not have been a Tennessee fan, but he was a fan of mine. These things are not the only things that he left behind for us. He lives through all of us. He lives through my mom and her love of math and her level-headedness. Through my dad, his ability for woodworking that he got from Pop, and for the passion of taking care of his family and those around him. He lives through Thomas, my brother, and his strength and perseverance. Through Stephen, not just in his name, but in his heart. Dylan with his quiet nature and gentle nature. Kyle and Carrie and their thoughtfulness and their behavior from him. And my Nana, with her abounding love, her caring heart, her hardworking nature, and her capacity for joy. Pop's nature left an impact on me, my family, his friends, and the community we're in, and that will carry us through the rest of our lives.
That's a hard song to follow. I need to do a little housekeeping. I know Steve's here. I feel him. I felt him all for the last week and a half. And Steve, do not get me tickled while I do this, nor will you make me cry. I have cried enough. I'm Susan Steffi. I've known Steve for 40 plus years. I met him when we started the Forsyth County Professional Association of Educators, PAGE, as most of you teachers know. Steve and I were both very active in the program throughout our careers, and we both became state and regional directors with PAGE. I'm so blessed to have worked with him directly when I was assigned to Coal Mountain as an assistant principal and as his assistant, full-time assistant principal. What a wonderful school. He became my professional mentor. Could not have asked for a better one. Steve and I were both selected by the governor to be participants in the Leadership Georgia program. And it helped both of us a great deal in our duties at Coal Mountain. Steve said to me one time, or more than once I guess, that we act like brothers and sisters in our decision making and in our leadership style. It made it a lot easier to work with someone like that. After his words, Steve truly became my brother from that point on. Steve opened Coal Mountain in 1981, with supplies and furnishings being extremely lacking, to say the least. The master woodworker that he was, he went home on weekends and evenings, and he built a bookshelf for every teacher's classroom to open Coal Mountain Elementary School. All his teachers appreciated what he had done, and they knew from way back when how much that he was going to care about their success and about the school's success. He was devoted to his students, ensuring they received the best education possible. He hired strong teachers, parapros, and staff, mixed with a helping of young teachers fresh out of college, which made for a very diverse and delightful mix. Some of those young teachers are here today and they're starting to get a little gray hair like the rest of us. Steve ensured that everyone, I mean everyone, under the roof of Coal Mountain was treated fairly, was treated with respect, and with dignity. For example, he told me that a teacher had shared with him that Kyle and Carrie were being bullied in one of their classes because their dad was the principal. He asked me to handle it. I called the boys up and I told the twins and Steve that they needed to push back and whack them if they needed to. Now, I also told them that they would be punished if they hit them. Well, sure enough, about a week later, here comes the teacher dragging them all up. And we had an opportunity for all of them involved, not just the twins, but the bullies, to go to what we called the opportunity room. And the opportunity room was something that we came up with where they could spend 2 days together to work out their behaviors and their differences. We didn't have any more problems with the twins catching it because Steve was their daddy. There was rarely ever an opening on the teaching staff at Coal Mountain. We constantly added to the list of folks wanting to work there or to transfer. I wonder why that was. It was because of Steve Benson's steady, quiet and easy, yet strong as rock leadership. There was never a question that a faculty member or staff would have Steve supporting and standing behind them if an unfortunate situation ever arose. And I know that personally. Now, if there was fault or mishandling by anyone, Steve was sure to make it fully corrected in a very small amount of time. Steve was very protective of his staff. He was very loyal to his staff. And they, in turn, were very loyal to him. After a tense conference with whomever Steve and I would, whomever we were with, it would have been a tough one, Steve and I would always bring each other what we called our antibiotics. We lived off of these, but they sure did help. They sure did help. We laughed constantly with all the funny happenings that were always occurring at the school. Steve had a great sense of humor and was on the mischievous side, right, Patsy? The twinkle in his eyes was seen often when he laughed. He allowed himself to be arrested at school. Kids are looking out the window, wondering what's going on. He was put in the sheriff's car. We all had to take up a collection to get him out of jail. Now, of course, it was all in fun, and it was raising money for a local charity. He even dressed up as a coal miner to represent the Coal Mountain mascot when they opened the new school, with sideburns and coal all over him. Teachers would share humorous stories with Steve and I about something that would happen in the classroom. And then we would just crack up. And sometimes we found ourselves in quite hilarious situations. I was evaluating a teacher one day in the lower elementary levels. She was doing vocabulary. Had her little desk, had her little flip chart with the words, and she landed on this word, squeaky. What, can you make a sentence with squeaky? She asked the children. And 2 or 3 of them just bouncing up and down, just couldn't stand it. They wanted her to call on them. And she did. She called on one of our other teachers' child. And they proceeded to speak a sentence. Squeaky. My mama and daddy's bed is squeaky at night. This teacher looked at me. I'm evaluating, and this teacher looked at me, looked like a deer in the headlights. And I knew I was going to lose it. So I snuck out the back door, made it to Steve's office before I just let it all go and told him what had happened. He pulled out the M&Ms. Steve had many families in addition to his beloved at-home family. He told me one time, and I quote this, I could live without the rest of the world. I cannot live without my family. Patsy, Stephanie, Terry and Kyle, Bruce, Lori, Ben, Rhonda, Tracy. He loved you all dearly, and he loved you deeply. And he was so proud of all that you had accomplished. Steve also had other families. His Boy Scout family, the Friday night Forsyth Central group, his volunteer firefighters group, his singing group, but he also had Coal Mountain Elementary, and he spent the most time with us. You see, the Coal Mountain staff under Steve's leadership became a family for all of us. We cared about one another. We relied on one another. We helped one another. And we trusted that our family would be there when and if we needed them. And they always were, with Steve leading the way. This was the kind of environment that Steve cultivated. Steve's leadership style was never authoritative, but inclusive and caring. But everyone knew where the decisions were made and where the buck stopped. Steve counseled countless teachers, not only in their educational matters, but often on personal issues to them as well. They trusted Steve's advice and his confidentiality, which was always there. My bond with Steve and Patsy strengthened even more after we all retired. All of us, including Jeannie Long, have shared so many wonderful adventures and, of course, eating so many meals together. And eating as we grew. We shared sitting above the clouds together, watching the beautiful sunset at Haleakala in Maui, driving the road to Hana, and taking the road at the end that said, "Do not enter." Oh, it's great. If you ever go, take the road at the end that says, "Don't go there." Snorkeling in Honolulu Bay with Patsy holding on for dear life, Steve here, me here. We are snorkeling. Now, Patsy's never going to be on an Olympic swim team, but she made it, and she did it. We helicoptered around the volcano and in and out of deep valleys with Judy holding on to Steve's leg until she almost cut off his circulation. I could go on and on, y'all. There's so many stories, so many adventures, and so many shared moments and laughs. Now it gives us many memories we have to hold on to. Will the staff of Coal Mountain please stand? If you ever worked for Steve Benson, please stand. In short, Steve Benson was Coal Mountain Elementary School. I'd like to challenge all of you, each and every one of you, to push the Board of Education to rename the school Steve Benson Coal Mountain Elementary. And I would like to push y'all to do that. You know how to do it. You form your committees. You get on the phone. You start a petition. Isn't that right, Paul? Yeah. And then you go to work. I think this would be the ultimate gift that we could give to Steve. We are so very lucky to have had our lives touched by Steve Benson. He was a gentleman as well as a gentle, caring man. I know I am a much better person because I have known him. Steve, we know you have already made heaven an even more better place as you did for all of us here on earth. Please do not grieve for Steve, but celebrate and smile for all that he gave to you, and move on through your lives with giving and love as he did. Soar on the wind, my brother. Fly high on the wings of the eagle. My beloved brother, be at peace. Blessings to you all. Peace be with you. And thank the Benson family for allowing me to be so honored to do this. And I'm taken by
Thank you for being here. My name is Butch Wills, and it's a sacred honor to tell you a little bit about Steve. The lifelong friend that I knew and loved and trusted and counted on. I don't have the human capacity to express in our current English language what a good man Steve was. I can give you a glimpse. A few weeks ago, Steve was walking into the ER with a temperature of 104, oxygen level of 62, and he asked Stephanie, "Did you lock your car?" Many of you knew him in his adult years, and I want to share with you a little of how he grew up, how he became the man we knew and loved. His character and inner strength was there from the beginning. Shannon, George, Phil, John, and I grew up with Steve. I knew him for 67 years. We all sat in church together, second pew back on the right side of First Baptist Church. We were inseparable. On Sunday afternoons, we played a rough version of tackle football. No pads, few rules. Steve, John, and I played on the high school football team, but our worst injuries came from this front yard football. We played baseball in Steve's pasture. We used hopefully dried cow panties for bases, and we did not slide into home. We found an overhanging rock, what we call Indian Rock, back in Steve's woods, where we found Indian pottery, arrowheads, corn grinders, and it's where the Cherokee women would shelter and make their pottery. Our parents encouraged our friendship and kept us together and kept us in line. If you've ever been sternly lectured by Mrs. Benson, or had a knot jerked in your head by Mrs. Miles, you understood this no-nonsense approach to discipline. Shannon, Phil, and I were in Miss Housley's first grade class. We got into trouble. We're hauled in by the school patrol. Mrs. Housley was so mad, she took us across the hall into the girls' bathroom to paddle us. We were more embarrassed than hurt. The school decided to correct this by separating us into 3 separate classrooms in the 2nd grade. The unforeseen problem with this was that Steve and I were together in Mrs. Roper's class and sat across from each other. This error in the school's thinking became evident one day when Steve was handing me a huge bag of marbles during class. And we dropped the bag, and marbles rolled, and they rolled under every desk. And that moment is locked in my little mind. Steve and I looked at each other for what seemed like an eternity. Now, if you look up panic in the dictionary, I think there's probably still a picture of me and Steve there. We joined the Boy Scouts, where we spent time together, camping, hiking, cooking, learning first aid, how to use a compass and map. We traveled to Philmont and even went to the Okefenokee Swamp and camped. Once we were poling through the swamp. That's where you can't use your little motor and you pole your way through the water. Shannon was in the front, Steve was in the middle, and I was in the back. We were fine until a snake dropped out of a tree into our little boat. Now, as teachers, you know about physics and the cause and effect principle. SI equal SO. Snake in, Steve out. Steve jumped out of the boat. We couldn't get him back in. We were pulling on his belt. The boat was tipping, taking in water. We had to get the snake out before he would come in there. And Mr. Alligator was on his way. We got Steve in just as the alligator went under the boat and slightly rocked our boat as he went under. Well, we made it. And together we went on to become Eagle Scouts and Brotherhood members of the Order of the Arrow. If you notice Steve's scout display, he had more merit badges than any of us. Mr. Scully was our scoutmaster. He took us camping probably 20 weekends out of the year. Later on, as adults, at Steve and Patsy's house, we had an honorary dinner for Mr. Scully. We presented him with a signed Troop 39 flag. He was a scoutmaster for 30 plus years. In his will, out of all those scouts, he requested Shannon, Steve, George, John, and me as his pallbearers. We were more than honored to do that. We all learned the 12 points of the Scout Law. Steve lived it. See if this doesn't sound like Steve. A scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. Sounds just like him. Later on in school, we became known as the Good Unks. And I guess that's a good description of us. A few years ago, we were at the Foster house. Steve said, "Come on, I want to show you something." He had bought a new Mustang and had a license plate that read Good Unk. We formed a rock and roll band. The only good thing about it was our name. We call ourselves the Nowhere Men. Later in our years, we would get together and talk about old times. Our wives were wonderful. They understood our bond and would sit back and let us reminisce, knowing how much we meant to each other. That there was a bond that could not be fully understood an inner circle that could not be entered. Steve liked to figure things out, fix things. He was our rock. He was sensible, our voice of reason. When we came up with silly ideas, he would say, let's think about this and go about it this way. Just being in Steve's presence, even if he was silent, was comforting. Patsy, Stephanie, Carrie, Kyle, Gail, grandchildren, spouses. We cannot comprehend the hurt and the loss that you feel. May our Lord comfort you. Shannon called me the night we lost him. We didn't say much. We didn't have to. We were just trying to comprehend this void and something we had never known. This life without Steve. I got up early the next morning, couldn't sleep. I was sitting by the fire. I always knew Steve was there if I needed him. He gave me comfort. He was just up the road. Except this morning, he wasn't. I'm going to go ahead and introduce another lifelong friend of Steve's, someone who's well known in our community, George Purple, who will speak, I think, after the music. Thank you.
I am the infamous George M. Kirkle that you heard about earlier. Butch could not possibly mention everything that happened when we were kids. And I'm not going to talk a lot about it, but we had a barn that we used to spend very many Friday nights in. And I can't even tell you what went on up there because it's kind of like going to Las Vegas. You never tell what you do. But we had a blast when we were kids. An absolute blast. And even after growing up. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that in a minute. But I heard earlier that there was going to be a musical interlude. And I also heard that Judy Jenkins was going to be the one singing. So I said, well, that's no problem. I'm not worried about following that. But this, I got a problem following it. But that was very good. Thank you so much for what you did there. Now, I'll get on to the meat of this thing. And my section of this is talking about Steve Benson as hero. Steve Benson, he may not have been John Wayne, but he was an even bigger hero to anybody who knew him. And every one of you in this room knew him. So you know what I'm talking about. I am deeply honored that Patsy asked us, Butch, Shannon, and me, here today to honor his memory, to say thank you, and to remember the amazing good times we all have had together. I apologize for having to read this because there's a lot of dates and places and things like that, and I'll get them all messed up unless I read it. So, Butch has spoken about his experiences in scouting and in school with Steve, and that's just the drop in the bucket, barely. I'm going to talk briefly about one single experience that galvanized our friendship forever, as if it wasn't already, and that again shows just how great a hero Steve was. Please forgive me again, I have to start with a brief backstory. In 2005, our daughter Charity was one of the first theater graduates from Oglethorpe University. She knocked around the Atlanta area for a year or so and finally did what she knew she wanted to do all along, and that was to go west, young woman. She and her mom, Karen, loaded up the Jeep, and the two of them headed for California, specifically Southern California. More specifically, Hollywood. Once Charity was settled in, Karen flew home, and we made several trips back out there to visit and inspect the wonders of Tinseltown and the land of fruits and nuts. Charity had a blast and actually found work, and she even got paid for some of it. But in October 2007, the Writers Guild in Hollywood went on strike. That was like trying to build houses without blueprints or plans. These days, you just don't produce films unless you've got words to go along with them before you even start. The support infrastructure in Hollywood collapsed. Mom and pops, cafes, shops, and other businesses that have been in business for 40 or 50 years closed their doors forever. Charity found herself caught in the pain and decided, wisely, it was time to come home. And that's where our real story begins. Karen flew out in February 2008 to help Charity pack up the Jeep and ride home. They started back on I-10 and gave me twice daily updates on their progress. About 10 a.m. on Friday, February the 15th, 2008, I was puttering around in the house, something I'm very skilled at, when the phone rang. It was Charity, and she greeted me with the three words that strike fear in the hearts of any parent. Dad, we're okay. She then said that they got about 6 miles west of Tucumcari, New Mexico, on Interstate 10, when a tractor-trailer drifted over into the left lane. Charity tried to get out of its way, but the trailer ran over the Jeep. She said they had a few scratches, but were otherwise physically okay. Not so the Jeep, and they were stuck in Tucumcari. Now, sometimes things happen for a reason. If I had been on that trip, if I had been behind the wheel of that Jeep, I would not be standing here talking now because it squashed the thing flat. Charity somehow was able to get out of the way, but I would not have been able to. Karen and I talked for a while longer, and I said that I would get out there somehow and bring them home. When I hung, just imagine that, okay? When I hung up, I knew I needed a whole lot of help. Neither of our vehicles had passenger or cargo room for what I needed. How was I going to make good on my promise? I immediately thought of Steve Benson. I called him and explained the situation, and I heard nothing on the other end of the line. I said, "Steve, are you still there?" He said, "I'm thinking." After a few more seconds, he said, "Let me call you back in about 15 minutes. Bruce, this Bruce, might be able to help you. Help us." True to his word, 15 minutes later, he called and said that Bruce just happened to have a spare Suburban that we could use. How many of you have spare Suburbans? Steve said that Bruce would get it ready for us and we should be able to leave about 4:30 or 5. I felt like Steve had literally lifted the world off my shoulders. I called Karen and told her to hang tight. We would get there as soon as possible. I made a few other quick calls, ran a few errands, packed an AWOL bag, and waited. How many of you know what an AWOL bag is? Anyway. Steve picked me up and we left the house at 5:15 that Friday. Steve said that Bruce, listen to this, washed the Suburban, checked and rotated the tires, changed the oil, made sure the battery was fully charged, and included a spare battery and a toolkit in case of trouble. He didn't include a chauffeur. Well, he did. That was Steve. In the scouting world, that's known as being prepared. Steve drove all the way. Well, that would be Steve. We pulled up to the Holiday Inn Express in Tucumcari at about 1:20 on Sunday afternoon. We made 1,112 miles in less than 48 hours, even with 2 overnight stops. The next day, Charity said goodbye to her Jeep. We loaded up the Suburban and headed back home with 2 very shaken passengers. Karen and Charity still remember that Steve's calm and quiet manner all through the trip home helped them both come back to reality from what had been a potentially deadly nightmare. Now, keep in mind, when I called that Friday, Steve dropped whatever he had planned to do that weekend so he could help us out of a dire situation. That was the weekend that Steve's name was entered into our pantheon of great American heroes for all time. But there's more. On the way out west, Steve and I talked about the best way to help Karen get over the bad memories of the trip that they were on, which was to go on another trip, covering much of the same ground as the one we were traveling, but in the other direction. We laid out a tentative plan and talked about the places we wanted to visit. We had a lot of time driving out there. We could talk about all sorts of things, and the list got longer and longer and longer. Thank goodness we didn't have to go all the way to Fairbanks. A few months later, we took the first of many great road adventures. You probably have seen a small part of some of them on Steve's video tribute. Folks, I'm going to be honest. We need him now. We need him now more than ever. And I'm afraid that this is one friend and one hero who simply will never be replaced. It's a good goal for any of you out there that want to try. Especially not in our hearts and our memory. Our thanks go out to Patsy and everyone in the family for letting us share the fun, the love, and the memories we have all had. Now I'll turn it to Dr. Shannon Mize, and I hope I'm a good, hard act to follow.
I'll have to say everything that's been said, George and Butch, is absolutely true. Really is. We had a wonderful time growing up together. I'm going to read a little scripture. This is chapter 5 of Ephesians. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water, the word, that he might present to himself the church in all glory, having no spot or wrinkle in any such thing, but that she should be holy and blameless. So husbands ought also to love their own wives, their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ also does the church. Because we are members of his body. For this cause a man shall leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is great, but I am speaking with reference to Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let each individual among you also love his own wife, even as himself. And let the wife see to it that she respect her husband. And in Ephesians 6:4, and fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. If you think about this couple, Patty and Steve, that says it. He did all that, without a doubt. You know, if you think about them in their marriage, they always worked together. They were a tandem. Why do you think that their yards were immaculate? And you could eat on the floor in the house? You know, at times really didn't want to go up to their house, because you know what the conversation would be when I went home? Why can't our yards in our house look the same way? What an example. And we appreciate it. And you all live that life. You know, if you go down Elm Street and you take a right into the new entrance of Forsyth Central High School, go in the front door, go in the atrium, look to the left, you'll see this beautiful cabinet. And in that cabinet, you'll see plaques. You have plaques with people's pictures. The one that you took, that's the birthday of Steve, right? Great picture of Steve. But anyway, you'll see these plaques and you have a brief biography. You can't put everything everybody did on these things. You say, what's this about? These people have been elected to Forsyth Central Hall of Fame. And what's happened is people that are Alumni Association, they can nominate somebody that they think has contributed significantly to the community and society as a whole. So if you go in that room today, you'll see a relatively new plaque. Matter of fact, it was put there in October this past year. And it says George Stephen Benson on it. Again, the picture that George took in Miss Bird. It has a brief biography. Can't do more than, I think, 250 words, something like that. You can't say everything about the person.
Not 226.
He's always doing that for me, I'm sorry. But anyway, so you can't put it all there. Susan did a great job about the educator. You just did a wonderful job of that, and we need to know that. There are several things on there, and they've been mentioned, that I want to just briefly say. He was a volunteer fireman for about 20 years. But you know why? Because he wanted to help people in need. And he could be called any time of night. Did it for about 20 years, I believe that's right, something like that. And then we've already talked about his work in the Boy Scouts. Incredible. He worked a lot with the local scout troop, and then he did a lot with Chattahoochee District. I mean, hours and hours and hours of committee work. He didn't get paid for that. But he wanted to do that. He wanted to help young men. And then, of course, as Susan's talked about, the educator. He was the ultimate constable educator. And I had one of the teachers that was under him about a week ago, and she was really concerned about what had happened, and of course I was too. She said, I want you to know something. He was the best principal I ever had. And she had been in several schools. And you know, the teachers and the staff, when he retired, and you know teachers don't make that much money, but when Steve retired, they got together, they accumulated enough money to send Patty and Steve to Alaska. Now, I'm gonna tell you something. If you've been to Alaska, it's not a cheap trip. That was significant. They thought a lot about Steve. It says a lot. Now, I'm gonna tell you a couple of stories. They may not be quite as funny, but I think they have some things to think about. Butch has already told us about Indian Rock. I think Steve was the one that actually found that. And interestingly enough, he didn't keep it to himself. He shared it with his buddies because he knew we all liked this kind of stuff. I guess over the time, though, that Steve and I probably spent the most time over there digging and scratching around, finding parter shards, arrowheads, stone tools, bone implements, and stuff like that. But after a while, we started talking with each other. We said, you know, who was here? How long ago were these people here? What was the environment like? What was the society structure like? How did they do these things that they did? And over a period of time, he and I started researching. And we weren't but 10 or 11 years old. But we started researching these things. And he and I built up a love of anthropology and archaeology. And as we grew, that expanded tremendously. We would go to archaeological sites together. We would study different cultures all over the world. And we learned together. We explained to each other what we had learned. Fast forward to the age of 18. Steve and I decided we had to go on a road trip. You like road trips? And so this road trip was a place called the Lime Sinks. Lime Sinks are right out of Sandersville, Georgia. That's kind of middle south Georgia. And it's just so happened that the Lime Sinks were a place where the ocean, 60 to 70 million years ago, had been. Actually, if you know that kind of thing, it actually came all the way up to North Georgia and North Alabama. So we decided that's where we needed to go, because we were on the fossils and things of that nature. But he and I decided to take a detour. It was about a 2 or 3 hour detour. And we decided that we had to visit my girlfriend, Gail Herring, and she was at Tift College in Forsyth, Georgia. Now, it just so happened that Steve and Patsy had arranged our very first date. And we did a lot of double dating. So we really can blame Steve and Patsy for a marriage. In April will be 50 years. Very blessed. Steve and I took probably about 2 hours there. Probably had a hamburger coat, something like that with her. And then we took off to my Aunt Ann's in Dublin, Georgia, and we spent the night with her, a wonderful person. She was not known as a good cook, but she could really cook spaghetti. And he and I were just about sick when we got through because we ate so much. Next morning, we say our goodbyes and we go to Sandersville, Georgia, to the Lime Sinks. And you say, how do we know about 60 and 70 million years ago? Because the University of Georgia did carbon dating there. They did a lot of study in this area. It was owned, and it still is, by a Puck Wood Company. And we had permission to go on it. We had a wonderful, wonderful experience there. We found shark's teeth, fossilized shark's teeth, skate's teeth, things that are extinct now. Sea biscuits. Sea biscuit just look like a real white biscuit, but they're fossilized sand dollars. We found fossilized plants. We found petrified wood, petrified bone. We were having a great day. So we went into a cave. This cave was not a dangerous cave, 50, 60 feet long. The creek meandered through it, and we had flashlights, and we were looking at the creek bed for fossils. I happened to find a skate's tooth. And Steve and I, at the same minute, realized that skate tooth was on the top of a gorgeous arrowhead. Now, to Steve and I, that was just incredible. Okay? I mean, wow. So we retrieved it. Later on, we get home, have everything, all our spoils are laid out, we're going to divvy up the spoils. And looking back on it, it's interesting to me that one of us might have found this, the other might have found that. There was none of this greed stuff. We wanted it split evenly. We didn't care who found what. Didn't care. It was true friendship. Then it came to the airhead. What are we going to do with this airhead? We both had it. It was something we both loved. Didn't take us any time. One of us came up with the idea, okay, one of us is going to keep it for X number of years, and then the other one will get it later on. We didn't put a time period on that. We trusted each other enough that that was not going to be a problem. It wasn't a question. Somehow or another, I wound up with it. I don't know how. And you know how time goes by? One day, probably 2.5 decades later, I'm looking at this frame of airheads that I have. And those of us that collect these things, you know where you found it, when you found it. You just know those things. And there it was. I said, oh my goodness, that's Steve's airhead. He had never mentioned it in all these years. So I got it out of the frame, wrote a little note with it, carried it up to him, and you know that smile he had, that wonderful smile. I handed it to him, immediately he knew what it was. You remember these things. Gave it to him. He says, that was a great day, wasn't it? And it was. It was actually better for me. It really was. To give that to him. You know, it hadn't been that long ago I was up in his study. And he's got a lot of neat things in his study. I love to go in his study. Because again, he and I love the same things. You know, on the wall was that airhead. The note was in it. True friendship. Without a doubt. Now, for you grandchildren, you may think that Pop really never got into any trouble. He never got into serious trouble. But he and I could be mischievous at times. So we were behind his mom and daddy's house. We were in the woods back there, and there were muscadines back there. Now, if you don't know what a muscadine is, it's kind of like a wild grape. He and I love muscadines, and they were ripe. So we get back there, and we about got sick. We had some money, and then we put a bunch of them in a paper bag. And then after a while, we find ourselves standing on the side of Highway 9. Well, there wasn't that many cars at that point in time there are now. But one of us decided, you know, it'd be a lot of fun to take this bag and we pretend like we're going to throw it in the car. You know, young teenagers, boys, have no sense. Okay? We were not an exception to that. So anyway, boy, that turned out to be pretty good. You know, we enjoyed that. After a while, a gorgeous 1944 coupe comes down the road. I mean, gorgeous. It's black. It was polished up really well. Oh, this is going to be good. And by this time, we had really gotten the timing down really well. I don't remember which one of us had the bag that time. It'll make a difference. So here it comes. Impeccable timing. One of us did the bag like this, and guess what happened? The bottom tore. And as that gorgeous 44 goes down, it is completely splattered with muscadines. Well, Steve and I looked at each other and said, this is not going to be good. And so, as stupid teenagers are, we took off for the house. In the corner of our eye, we saw this gorgeous car turning around. So Steve and I took off, got in the house, and went and hid. Now, unfortunately for us, Truman, George, his daddy, was at home that day. And as somebody has already intimated, he didn't put up with anything. No nonsense. World War II guy, no nonsense. So we were hiding, and we heard these hushed tones after the knock on the door. And it went on for a little while, and all of a sudden we're boom, boom, boom. Steps coming right for us. Now, I don't know how he knew where we were hiding. I guess it's a parent thing, you know? You boys get up and get up right now. And you follow me. Do you understand me? Yes, sir. So with fear and trepidation, Steve and I followed him out, and that guy gave us a lecture, which we deserved. We apologized, we did all the stuff, we offered to wash his car. You ain't touching my car. So anyway, so he left, thank goodness. But then there was truth. And let's just suffice it to say this. Steve and I were very adequately punished that day. My parents didn't care, because when I got home, I got punished again. That's the way it was with us. All right, there's a couple things I want to talk to grandchildren about, real briefly. It has already been said. Steve loved you more than you can know. The only way you'll know that Steve loved you is to have your own. There's been many a time that Patsy, my wife Gail, and Steve and I were talking about you guys, and it wasn't gossip. They were proud, he was proud of you, Patsy was proud of you. We heard about your accomplishments in school. We heard about your scout projects. We heard about your Eagle project, getting Eagle. It was wonderful. We're like family. We enjoyed hearing it. But there were dark times. Some of you were really sick. Steve was worried, really worried. And I hope Gail and I could help out during those times. And then the other thing I want you to remember is this. There's a lot of different definitions of friendship. You can go, there are tons of definitions. Sometimes they say there's 3 different types of friendship, etc., etc. Like Butch and George have said, we had a friendship. We had a bond, we have a bond. We have a bond of love. We'll do anything for the other one. George just said that. Steve put it all out. The next day they were on the road. Didn't make any difference what he was doing that weekend or whatever. He put it all on the line. That's what we do. That's true friendship. That's a true blessing. It's a blessing from God. So if you can do anything in your life, have those friendships. They'll get you through bad times. Yeah, Steve was my friend. He was also my brother.
Congregation, please stand.